how I begin my show.
This is morning.
Now I will be very courageous. 6 a.m.
Wake up, صباح الخير. Wake up, صباح الخير. صباح الخير. Wake up, صباح الخير. صباح الخير. Wake up, صباح الخير. صباح الخير. Wake up, صباح Wake up, صباح الخير. Wake up, صباح الخير. صباح الخير. Wake up.
Then after that I say, it's 6 a.m. I am Mading Ngor Oct, and this is Wake Up Juba, your home for politics with Bakita 91 FM, the voice of the church. It's not really voice of the church, but it's owned by the Catholic radio. Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you for coming to listen to me, and I'm grateful. Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite a celebrity, but I'm glad that you have come and to listen to me. I will talk about my work, I will talk about my country, I'll talk about my future and whatever you want to talk about.
You're also the creator of the longest radio intro in radio history. But that was a great imitation of a rooster. I don't know how you do that at that hour, but that was impressive, very impressive. My role is really just to kind of offer Mading opportunities to sort of speak about his experience, both his remarkable story, which is part of why he's here today, but also for an audience interested in communications and the role of a young journalist in Africa, what it is to practice his profession in a country and a culture that is kind of new to the kind of journalism that Mading is concerned to engage. So I'm going to start with a kind of biographical question. You are part of the South Sudanese diaspora, one of the lost boys, and of course there were girls too, who fled a civil war, and this is really kind of focuses the mind, a civil war that lasted with one brief truce from 1955 to 2005, a 50-year civil war with a modest truce somewhere in the middle. I think they just got tired and then started again. You arrived in Canada as a child, really, or a young teenager, in 2001, and you spent 10 years living in Canada on your own. You left your family in Kenya. You did some education at Grant MacEwan, where you did a diploma or degree in journalism, and came to Royal Roads and finished in the BA in professional communication, where I was your teacher at several points. And then you've gone back to South Sudan, a country that did not exist when you left it, or left Sudan. And you're now a 29-year-old journalist who hosts the most popular morning radio show in a capital city in a country most people haven't heard of. Put all that together for us.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and thank you, David. David Black, Dr. David Black is my nominator, and I had a chance, to speak to him a bit about politics. I'm passionate about politics when I was a student here at Royal Roads, and I think that's where he felt that maybe I'm a thoughtful young man, someone who is passionate about my work, and so he nominated me, and I made it. So I'm thankful to you for bringing me this far, and now I can talk about how I got here. And it hasn't always been a hopeful story. I was born in a small village in South Sudan, and growing up, I thought I had a normal childhood, like any African child. You go and swim by the nearby lake, or you go and my people they are cattle rearing people, and as a child I used to take care of cattle. I used to be in a cattle camp, and I did so many things that were beyond my age, but that was fine. I was having a good time as a child. And then in 1991, my world changed. 1991, there was a massacre. There was a split in the mainstream rebel movement that was fighting against the Sudanese regime, and the split was on tribal grounds, and my area was affected, and hundreds were killed. I fled to the bush with my mom, barefoot, and wherever I went, I saw dead person, dead cow, dead person. Some of you have probably heard about my story in the media. And I was hiding in the bush with my mom, and that was the story of everyone else. And we fed on wild fruits to survive. Sometimes you get a bitter one, sometimes you get a sweet one, and really that is life. And a month later, we found our way out of that nightmare. And like I never really went back to the Sudan where I was born, to my hometown. But I was in the Sudan. We would go to from one town to another town, because when you are in a peaceful area for a month, and then the enemy would follow you again, and you would be bombed. Those planes they call antonopes. They are like fighter jets. They would drop bombs. I remember one time. You have to run to the trench every time, nearby trench. And one time we ran to a trench, and a bomb fell on our trench, but it didn't get nearby our trench. One of my aunts didn't make it to the trench, and the bomb fell, but went slightly over her. And so it was always that kind of life, Death was just around the corner, just a matter of whether you are lucky or not. Luckily, years later, I made it to a refugee camp in Kenya, where I went to primary school. And refugee life is, okay, we get peace, we are no longer getting bombed by the antelopes, or the enemy is no longer coming after us, but it's a stagnant life. It was, what do? You wait for food from the UN, handouts. 15th day of the month, you go to the so-called distribution center. You get a little bit of, a little bit of oil, a little bit of salt, a little bit of everything you need, and then you go back every time. And that was my life until 2001, when a relative of mine fought for a visa to Canada, and he got it, and I came to Vancouver, where I started going to New West Secondary School, and it was a different challenge every time. Sometimes I find ignorant kids who would call me names, but my attitude was, I ran away from racism. It's not because it is Canada. It also happened where I'm from. And if it's not racism, it's tribalism. And it's, it's same. It's not about the skin color. It's just about ignorant people. And in Canada, I always knew I was coming to Canada for a reason, and that was to get an education. I never got a chance to go to school uninterrupted. Even when I went to school at a very early age, I never stayed in one place for 3 months or for a term. It was always life on the run. And so what Canada did was to create that stability, and I knew that whatever I will face is not like life-threatening. I almost became a soldier myself, and I might have been dead now. I know some of my colleagues didn't make it, and went through high school, then Pearson College, then Grand McEwen, and then Royal Roads, and I'm now a winner. So I still don't believe it. I still don't believe it, but I always knew that life can change, and it has to. My people say that it's the dead person that is poor. But as long as you are alive, you can do anything.
We're in the presence tonight of an audience that is surely worldly and well-traveled. But Juba, your home currently, which is the capital city of South Sudan, is not the easiest place to get in or out of, and probably not well known to most of us here. What's it like to live in the capital city of the world's newest nation, in a country with only 200 miles of road, of paved road?
Juba, it's hot. And you have seen that video. I didn't notice how much I was, sweating. Like in Juba, I thought it was normal. But then I come to Canada, I'm in a good suit, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's embarrassing. So it's hot. That's the first thing. And it's hot politically, and it's hot in terms of weather. And, it's not a planned city. It's growing, yes, because, you find a plot, you get a plot, and you build something. And then later on, they realize, oh my goodness, road has to pass here, so they demolish it, and they don't compensate you. That's not to trivialize, how things are going. But Juba is a difficult place. Like, South Sudan is new everywhere. Now we are realizing that Juba cannot be a modern capital city because there's no sewage in place. Every time they have like sewage tankers, and they have water tankers. So people don't get water in their homes. Like, they don't have taps, they don't have anything like that. So a water tanker has to deliver. So you buy water, even though the Nile is just around the corner, and people buy water. And it's so expensive for regular folks. And those are some of the issues I tackle on my radio show. And like, I almost made it a point. I used to go to the National Assembly. I covered it extensively. I took interest because it's supposed to be the house of the people. And sometimes you have some MPs who would table a motion about water shortage or things that are responsive to everyday concerns of the citizen. And I will always bring them to the show to talk about what they are doing. Juba, it's much more difficult now. Life is a lot more difficult because the economic situation is difficult, because South Sudan is a landlocked country, and we still have a lot of issues with the North. They call them post-independence arrangements or post-independence issues. And basically, we depend 100% on oil. And that oil has to pass through the North, through the pipeline in the North. And if there is no agreement, if there is no viable arrangement between the two countries, not very much progress can happen. And we found that when in January, and South Sudan was no longer getting the oil money because Sudan was diverting the oil. It was stealing it, and we were not getting anything. So the decision was to shut it down. They are getting 100%, we are getting 0. So how about we equalize it? Let's shut it down. Or what happened? Prices went up, and there's no hard currency coming back to the economy. We are an import economy. We don't export anything. So life in Juba is very difficult, but people are determined to roll over. I was amazed when the decision was announced to shut down the oil, and hundreds and hundreds of citizens came out in support, and they said, yes, it's our oil. Now, but when you look at the objective factors, how are they going to survive without it? Nobody wanted to deal with that. You just want to claim what is yours, and you don't worry about the rest because we have been living without oil, so we can overcome. I don't know if it.
Well, what's remarkable, just a few facts. So when he speaks of the North and this neighbor that they have to negotiate with, this is a country they were at war with for 50 years. This is a country, Sudan, that also goes to war on its own people, hence the genocide in Darfur. This is a country culturally very different, of course, Arabic and Islamic, the South, African indigenous, some indigenous languages spoken, and traditional religion, not Islamic for the most part, right? but it's a country, Sudan, on which South Sudan absolutely depends for the shipping of oil, which is currently the primary capital it has available to it. South Sudan, the illiteracy rate in South Sudan is 80%. The radio is the medium that people can engage with because literacy, as we typically define it, is just not widely available. So these are circumstances that would challenge any people and any country. And here you are, only a year into independence, already in some sense engaging in new tensions with this country that's three times your size in terms of geographical and also population. 9 million people in South Sudan. Let's get back to the important thing. What about the people of Juba? When you wake them up, and of course they're a little grumpy. Of course, it's 6 in the morning. I would be too. But who is there? Who has come to this city, kind of built quickly, a city of 350,000?
I'll tell you the audience that I was trying to reach. My show is in English, and I had a lot of difficulty with it at the beginning because people were saying, what about the folks that speak Arabic? And Arabic is the dominant language. In Juba, they have Juba Arabic. So why don't you speak Juba Arabic? And well, for me, my training is in English. And I know very little Arabic. I can do interviews in Arabic, but not as fluent. And the base that I wanted to connect to were, mostly literate, college graduates and government officials, And the way I set up my show is the newsmaker of the day that comes to my show. So if the oil is shut down today, following morning, the Minister of Petroleum and Mining will come, and that is basically how it operates. And really, it's hottest political show in Juba because every issue that citizens want to talk about, we talk about. And I have really committed myself to giving a voice to the people who feel the same like me, but they don't have that opportunity to be able to hear those. And I have created, it's the 2 hours show. The first 1 hour is news, and then there is something I call wake-up call. Wake-up call is like a call-in where listeners, they call in, and I am basically flexible. If they want to talk in Arabic, that's fine. But they know that the show is, it's mostly in English. And wake-up call, they would express their views about something, whether, whatever it is, they are going to be able to do it. And I barely censor them, but I always make sure that freedom of speech doesn't mean you say everything you want. You have to be fair. Once someone called and said, oh, this government is a government of criminals. And for me, I thought that was over the top. And as far as I'm concerned, they haven't communicated. What do you mean? You have relatives in the government. What are you trying to say? So in such situations, I would let them go. I'm not going to entertain such kind of rhetoric because we emphasize solutions. And even though the government may be uncomfortable with the show and people expressing their views, I always remind them that, hey, it's you that is coming to talk, by the way. I have brought more government officials to this show in my 1 year than in the history of the radio station. And so I'm only asking you tough questions, and you can be afraid about that, but I am asking legitimate questions. I'm not doing witch hunting. I have no axe to grind with the system. In fact, I am part of the system. And I have made it clear to them that I lost my father because of this revolution. I lost my uncles because of this revolution. So I'm not for regime change, but I am for change. And I mean, things cannot be stagnant. We are not going back to the bush, I tell them. We are moving forward, and yes, we are not going to be America overnight or Canada overnight, but we are not moving to the bush.
Since we're talking about the work you do as a journalist, I think it would help for you to sort of situate yourself as a radio and a print journalist. And you should know that Mading not only produces these shows, he's also a stringer for writers. He's published in the Huffington Post. He has a global audience for his work. And during his years in Canada, I think during your Grant MacEwan and Royal Roads years as well, you were the producer and editor-in-chief of a website for the South Sudanese diaspora. Again, before there was a country called South Sudan, you were helping to build its self-consciousness. You were helping expatriates discuss among themselves their plans, their ideas, their grievances about this nation. So what I'd like you to do is, we have this idea, and I know there's some actual working journalists in the room. I can recognize a few. There's Jack, for example. But you know, the view of journalism we have in North America on a good day is one that is dispassionate, it's fair-minded, it's concerned for facts, it's concerned to sort of rationally inform readers and listeners, to separate truth from the dross of life. But you are doing journalism in a country that has been at war for 50 years, where there was little freedom of speech, there was very little in the way of kind of normal conditions for media to do its work. A country where propaganda has been the mainstay of communications, both from the regime in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, and of course the rebel forces fighting the revolution wherever they found themselves. So there you are, not just practicing your craft, but you're establishing the craft's very existence in a country that is still relatively new to print and radio journalism as you might wish to practice it. How do you do your work in a way that allows you to kind of honor your training at Grant MacEwan and here, while still finding yourself in a culture and a country that is maybe not entirely ready for journalism as North Americans might define it?
Yes, it's not the journalism I learned in the classroom. And if my teachers go and listen to my show, they'll say, we haven't trained you, you know. And the way I approach it, you know, this idea about neutrality, when you are building a nation, it doesn't exist. I think fairness should, but not neutrality. And I'm not Cronkite or anything, but I look back to his days and those giants of the 60s and the 20s, and they called it like it is. And maybe because of the times. And I feel like we are living in historical times in South Sudan. The way I approach media and journalism is nation building. You have a nation that is not a nation state. We have succeeded in getting South Sudan, but we don't have South Sudanese. We don't have citizens who see themselves as, you know, part of a country first, but everybody is coming from everywhere. I am from my tribe. My first allegiance is to my tribe, not to the nation. And in such a situation, you're not going to be able to, I mean, what I do is to emphasize the commonality. And I tell you, even the radio station belongs to a certain, you know, it's owned by a certain region, and it's not heavily representative. I can say I am the only one who is from another tribe, and I would have not survived if I didn't have a national agenda. And the people I bring, I'm always mindful. That's part of the challenge. Every single show that I do will be subjected to ethnic lenses. You do a panel, and if it is, you know, everybody is from your area, that is problematic, even when they are the best voices or the hottest, you know, people in town as far as news goes. So I'm mindful of where we have to go, and the media has a great role to play to be able to, you know, to paint like a hopeful future, and one that brings everybody together. And there are times when, like, the media around me doesn't really buy into what I do. But I know the feedback that I get is very encouraging, and I know people think that I am doing the right thing, and I just continue to do that. I don't know if I'm lost in answering.
No, not at all. I'm going to ask you to address the other side of your work, the one that is always there, as you go about doing this work of building this new nation and providing people with access to politicians, African politicians, who they would never see or hear from normally. And this is something that's been brought home for you sharply in the last several weeks, as you've been yet again threatened by the government for your work, and your radio station threatened with closure. If you can, and I know it's a painful topic, give us some sense of the dangers and the risks that you undertake as you do this work 1 year into independence.
It is a dangerous job, and I know my listeners, they have bought into the whole idea, and even some politicians to some extent, they are now understanding my kind of journalism. And they know that Wake Up Juba is a very tough show, and they have to go prepared because they cannot go and make up facts and what have you. And can you repeat the question?
Sure. Give us some sense of the risks that you live with daily as you do your work.
When you are that kind of journalist who is very critical, and there have been critical shows where I would ask politicians to apologize for something, and they are not so much into that.
Not here either, so yeah.
When you are that kind of journalist, you expect anything to happen. And it's something that I have signed up for. It's something that, I'm not reckless. That's why I haven't been arrested, thank God, because every morning I wake up and I address the real issues. And my goal is to remind my people, my country, about where they have come from. And the politicians every morning about what they fought for. Because we lost millions of people to get this freedom. And why I get up every day, despite all the challenges, despite whatever that can happen to me, being fully conscious that I can die in the line of duty. The reason why is because of hypocrisy that I see happening, that we fought for our independence, we kicked out the oppressors, we are now free, and we are doing the same thing. We are doing the same thing. We fought against centralization. We have centralized things. And 80% of the national cake is shared only in the capital city. We said we were fighting for justice, yet there is no justice. We are going against the values, the noble values our very fine young people died for. And that is what gives me the courage to wake up every morning and tell it like it is. Because if you don't do that, you are exactly like the other person. And the narrative was always, it's about the Arab man. But it was about a system. It was about an oppressive system. And if you don't change anything about that system, if you don't put better systems in place, you will end up in the same shoes. Black oppressors, anybody can oppress. And that is what we are seeing in Juba. And really, you cannot build a nation without pioneers. You cannot, if everybody retreats, and I come to Canada and I just maybe go and do masters at Royal Roads if I get another opportunity to come here, and everybody leaves, then who is going to nation build? So I am aware of the risk involved, and it was brought home, like you have said. There was an incident in March when, like I was telling you earlier, that I have been covering the parliament a lot. And I tell you, the first day I went to the parliament, they told us that we have to be at a public gallery. That's where we would cover it. And I said, okay, fine. I went up there. You can see the chamber is down, further down. And it's very difficult to take a picture. They don't care about your interests. They don't care about what is good for journalism. Even so, I tried to take a picture, and the flash went off, and they nearly murdered me, the security. They grabbed me, and they confiscated my camera, and they pulled me out and took me to a room, and they were interrogating me. I asked them, what have I done wrong? You're not allowed to take a picture. I'm like, but that is what journalism is. How can I tell a story without taking a picture? And finally, they gave me my camera. Then I went and asked the deputy speaker, journalists are not allowed to take pictures? And he said, well, no, it's only if you have a mobile phone. You're not allowed to take a picture. So I said, well, why wasn't that communicated? And there are not many rules. So that was the first day in the National Assembly before the biggest incident happened. And that incident happened almost like a year later. I went and sat exactly at that place, public gallery. At the beginning, I didn't quite make the transition to radio. I was writing for my website, and I needed those pictures. And so now I was a radio journalist, and it didn't matter to me where I sit. It's immaterial where I sit because I get the same audio. So I never complained. And so on this day, I was recording the session, and every time the session is interrupted because you were asking me about Juba earlier, it's all about the generators because we don't have any hydro, we don't have, not everything is generator. And we can talk about environmental implications and what have you, which is, nobody is talking about that, so long your generator is on. And so what happened in the National Assembly, you would have a hot session, and then the generator goes off because there's no fuel. And that's what happened on this day when I got in trouble, and I'll come to it. I was recording at the public gallery. The lights went out. The MP was speaking but was not being heard, obviously. And when that happens, the room heats up, the chamber heats up. So many MPs, they go outside and they wait until the generator is turned back on again. But it was like the last item, 5 minutes, I think. And it was the most important, it was the climax. So I wanted to record it. So when the lights went off, I went downstairs and I sat in the lobby, and the chamber door was swung open, so I could see, what was happening there. And then the lights came and they started speaking. Now I had a dilemma. Do I go back to the public gallery, or do I go back to the chamber where I have sat there before many times and nobody asked me? And if I had gone back to the public gallery, it would have been like a minute, and I would miss a chunk of what I have been looking forward to. So in the interest of getting the story, I went into the chamber, but I sat at the back. There's a bench completely empty, and even the chamber is half empty, because if you have the quorum, then you don't mind about who is not there. And so I sat there at the back, and I turned my recorder on. I recorded, and security walked up to me and asked me to leave. I said, I'm just recording this last item, and I will be gone. Told him that I was sitting at the public gallery before that. He said, you must leave. And I tried to reason with him, but he walked away from me, I think, to go and get more security. So I didn't wait. I took my recorder and I went outside the chamber. And he followed me outside, and he said, why didn't you want to leave when I was telling you to leave? I said, well, I'm already outside. And he said, okay, you must now leave the premises of the National Assembly. I said, I cannot do that, because the problem was inside, not outside. And I have been waiting all morning to be able to interview these MPs who are now about to come out and you want me to leave. That's when you got 4 security guards to get me out by force. They grabbed each of my hands, each of my legs. They got me on my back. I had my best suit on that day. And in the morning, I had the Minister of Higher Education. I always, after my show, go straight to the National Assembly. Felt good about myself, and they got me on my back. I fell flat on my back, and they were pulling me whatever direction. So my pant was torn right in the middle, and I felt so exposed and humiliated, and they were dragging me on the floor, taking me outside by force. Then MPs started coming out, and they recognized me, and it's like, Mading, what are you doing down there? Like, well, you're seeing what's happening. And when they realized that, the security realized that these MPs actually know me, they just left me there. But that was fine. What happened the next day, it was brought up in the National Assembly by some MPs who are sympathetic, and they said, this is the house of the people. Such things must not be entertained and must not happen. And the speaker said, yes, justice will be done. We are going to investigate the whole thing. And what I did differently from other reporters was not to let the issue go. I went and reported it to the concerned, like they have committees, so a committee of information. And the chairperson, said that it's something we are going to investigate. So I was confident that it's something they will investigate. And when it came up the following morning, they were largely sympathetic. But then there is this chairperson of the security committee. He got up and he said, Mading Ngor is a troublemaker. I knew him when he was in Canada. And he has been wrong. He has so many cases. And it has spoiled the whole thing. The next day came up, and it came up. And then finally the investigation was done. And the conclusions were that, first thing, I'm not a journalist. Second thing, I come without identification. I don't identify myself. Third thing, they say that I have been creating trouble all the time. I have many cases there, including once walking to the speaker's office, and I demanded that I must get an interview because I'm a South Sudanese. So I must get an interview. Next day they changed it. They said it was the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs, not the Speaker. So it was politicized. And the gentleman that spoiled the whole justice process is someone that is known to me. And when I was in Edmonton, that's when I started doing interviews for my website, and it was part of an investigation committee that was looking into how, like the plane crash that killed the founding father of South Sudan. And so he was in Nebraska, and I gave him a call. I asked for an interview, and he gave it to me. Made it available on my website, and he basically alleged that the late leader was killed by people he called his friends, pointing fingers at Uganda. And so I made it available on my website. Then the newspaper in Uganda, the leading newspaper in Uganda, picked it up, and front page story. New details on Garang's death, and the inflammatory comment. He was Deputy Minister of Interior. He lost his job after this. But I remember when I called him right after the interview, the first question he was asking me is, did you publish the thing? I said, yes. Like, I'm getting calls from Khartoum, calls from everywhere, and they are saying, what is this new thing you have dropped through Mading? And who is Mading? He said, I don't even know who is Mading. He sounded honest on the phone. So I gave him an interview. But then he assured me that whatever I wrote there was professional. His words, he will carry his own cross. And he even asked me to go back to South Sudan because he has been part of destruction. He asked me, do you think I can be part of the construction? So that is the kind of guy, but he's like, they call him a misguided missile. He can, he can go whatever direction anytime. So he politicized the whole thing, and what happened, he recommended, and I was there when he recommended that, I was recording. He said that given all this negative attention, this young boy has brought so much trouble and has tainted our image, and we must ban him from ever coming to this assembly. And as soon as the security heard that, they came for me, and they got me, and they took me out, and for about a month, I wasn't coming to the National Assembly. And I was also hearing some reports that like some MP who I don't even know, who I have never interviewed, but I know he's the chairperson of Public Accounts Committee. And once he brought, like, you know, there was a hot discussion about corruption, and I always record their voices and make it available on my show. So I think that might have angered him. And he said that, oh, this guy, he comes drunk to the parliament throughout. No, throughout. It's not even like 2 days or 3 days, but throughout. So it was politicized, and I was banned from covering the National Assembly. So those are some of the dangers that are there. And I know that anything can happen. And sometimes it's not, because I'll tell you, the last few days, I was in Juba. It was as if I was running from my country.
This is just before you came here.
Yes, before I came here.
There was a kind of flare-up of concern or unwelcome attention from government.
What happened was it came on the heels of this historic agreement that has been signed with Sudan. Remember, when that oil was shut down, there have been negotiations, but there was no breakthrough. So that breakthrough came 2 weeks before I left. And the agreement guarantees that South Sudan will assist Sudan with $3 billion. Think about the poorest nation on earth giving a rich country like Sudan $3 billion over 3 years. That comes to about $15 per barrel. On top of that, we are giving them transit fees. On top of that, 2 oil fields that belong to us, they will be taking them. And then there is so-called 4 freedoms where citizens can go to Sudan and work, and citizens of Sudan can come to South Sudan and work and acquire property and what have you. We know we have thousands of citizens in both countries. The difference is that the Sudanese citizens in South Sudan, they are the ones who own the shops, they are the ones who have the money. So that was the deal that we were talking, that was signed. And many citizens in South Sudan were very critical, and obviously so, because even before South Sudanese, they said, okay, it's fine. We're going to give them $3 billion. What we are doing really is to buy our freedom. And they said that in the context of a comprehensive deal that demarcates the borders and that solves, the outstanding issues. But that was not the deal we got. The deal was on oil, and where do you want to take it?
Well, I just want to frame it. So in March, you had this situation
So let me just lead to the trouble.
Okay.
And my approach, unlike other radio stations or newspapers, was to open debate about these issues. And what happened, like day after the agreement was signed, cabinet minister called me at night, Minister of Higher Education, said that I am coming. Who's coming to Wake Up Juba? I said, there is someone coming, so I'm also coming. Said, okay, fine, he's hot. I need a newsmaker. So he comes in the morning and then he says, this deal is a raw deal. It must be rejected. It's null and void. It's not for the interest of South Sudan. And so that's one of the things that angered them. And then we have had, people who are for the deal, who are against. We have had ministers. So we did a debate. At some point, they called journalists, and I wasn't there, and they said, you must support this agreement. Don't be like Wake Up Juba. Don't be like Mading Ngor. You must support this agreement. And what happened, they initiated the process to shut down my show. They called my boss, and they said, you must shut down this show, or else your radio station will not be there. And if it was up to him, I would have been gone right away. But the radio is owned by the church, so he said that, okay, I'm going to forward this to the church, and let's see what they think. The church said, no, you cannot shut down a show because people express their views. And the next thing for them was to come for me. And
this was recently, right?
This is recently, just like a week before I came. And so then I had 2 meetings, the national security. And in those meetings, they were telling me that, okay, we have orders. We have orders from above to get you. But here is your last chance. You must cooperate with us. You must let us know the night before who's coming and what they are going to talk about. I said, okay, I'm not going to promise you that I will not bring people who are not critical of the government, but I'll try to control the callers more. That I can do. But they are saying, you must tell us who's going to come and what they are going to talk about. So that was fine. I felt like, okay, at least the dialogue is going, and there was no imminent, step. Then I discovered that where I stay, the neighbor next door, it's like 2 containers. The next one is national security. And I am so insecure. And on top of that, the neighbor is national security. And how did I know about it? He had full uniform on, and he came knocking on my door.
That's good.
And another neighbor, who's the Ugandan national, he immediately went. I was on another side. I was there, and she went and told me, by the way, our neighbor is national security, and he came knocking on your door. So, and you were telling me you had problems with the government, so don't sleep here. So that's what I did. I left, I went and slept in the studio. And in the last days in Juba, I was sleeping in the studio. And then I heard that he made a call to one of my relatives who lives with me that, I just wanted to talk to my relative who lives with me. There's no trouble. And for me, it reminds me of a fairy tale where, hyena has children, and then he sends the children to go and ask Uncle Lion whether the children can go there because it's raining. And the hyena said, just listen to the first word. First word, you listen to it keenly and tell me. So they go and they say, Uncle Lion, our mother is saying, can we come here because it's raining? Said, yeah, you guys can come. Nothing will eat you. So they go back and say, Uncle says, nothing will eat you. I'm like, where did the eating part come from? Where is the eating part coming from? And for me, the fact that he was national security is enough for me to stay away from that place. And I wanted to make it to Canada.
That's a good segue. So I'm reminded, in reading more about South Sudan, there was a great quote in the recent Reporters Without Borders report, saying that in Juba right now, a person with a camera, because people are so unused to journalists, is thought to be a spy. So there's this tension between, exactly who the journalist is. I'd like you to we're going to play another clip. This is a show you did at the moment of independence, where you were interviewing people, correct? And if you could set this up for us, give us some sense of what was going on, what was happening in the streets, And what were people expressing as you interviewed them?
And to tell you, I went to South Sudan to witness that independence, because it's the biggest story for any journalist. And for me, it's a culmination of everything my people have been fighting for. And on the eve of independence, I went to sleep, but then I was hearing sounds from everywhere, lots of excitement. And then I asked myself, oh my goodness, I'm a journalist and what am I doing here? And this is what I came for. So I went out, I took my recorder, I started running with the youth, and I fell, one of my foot fell in a deep pit. And, it's like, lots of garbage there and it's wet. And so I had to run back to go and change. And then I ran up to the youth. They were running everywhere. Cars were honking. The excitement was just phenomenal. And what struck me about the eve of independence was that everybody was young. Young people who were running and expressing joy. They did it in Arabic. They did it in whatever language. There were some that were singing. And I think the ones that I'm going to play for you, I can comment on them, but I want to play them for you because they captured the spirit of what was going on that day. And I can even tell you what some of them might be thinking now, a year later. And
You'll have the clip, please.
The soldier was a time when we didn't know the national anthem.
You come on.
Let's go.
I'll sing.
Trying to sing the national anthem together. I don't know it well.
Don't know theirs either, so
We
yeah.
pray and glorify you for your grace and South Sudan, land of great abundance, of all us united in peace and harmony. For justice, liberty, and for parity.
That's the soldier.
Shall forevermore reign. Oh, great day. Oh, motherland, with a racing flag, with the guiding star, and sing songs of freedom with joy.
For justice,
Liberty,
and prosperity. Oh, great patriots, let us stand up
in silence and respect, saluting our martyrs with blood, cemented our national foundation. We vow to protect our nation. Oh, God bless us, Sudan.
What's your full name? Why are you so happy today?
Because I'm happy we have a new nation was born tomorrow. That is why I'm too happy.
Well, it's today. And what does it mean for an SPLA soldier like you?
What I mean to defend
What freedom means for you?
The freedom means I can become well and I can become better forever and ever.
But sometimes the SPLA soldiers would go for 6 months without pay. What is
We are not concerned about pay. We are concerned about this our soil. Even we can spend 3 years we stay in our lands to be our nation, to be a future for our children.
All your comrades that died because of this soil, was it?
There is a many. There is a many died. Brother and sister and mother and father, even our dogs, even our cow, even our birds. All our things are died. Even trees, they are died. Even our soil. There is some soil are not function for us.
Do you think they died for a good cause?
Now become a good. But later it was not good. if we become another country, it's good. Because yours can keep. If somebody need to take yours, he can kill you. If you
said, what was your full name?
My name is Michael Maduagatwai.
Where you come from?
I'm coming from Juba barracks.
And originally, like your area?
My area is Wow Nar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Stop there.
You can see the determination. And here is a soldier, he's semi, literate. And that's how we felt. And for 6 months, you will have soldiers, not receiving their salaries. And that's what I was asking him. He said, we are not concerned about pay. It's our country. It's our country that is the most important thing. So on the eve of independence, there was a lot of jubilation, there was a lot of excitement, and a lot of euphoria. Finally, we are free. And a year on, there's a lot of hardship. Very little has changed in the lives of the people. But people still think that, independence was worth everything. But now we have the nation build. Let me take it back to you, and then we can talk about
I have
those
one
issues.
question left, and then I think we'll just open it to discussion. And again, a sort of good transition from what you just said. In your speech to the convocation in the afternoon at the Royal Theatre yesterday, you organized your talk into 3 parts. The world as it was, the world as it is, and the world as it should be. In discussing the world as it was, you spoke of your past life in Sudan before South Sudan was created. Sort of living in enemy territory, effectively. For you spoke of your decision to return there after 10 years of life and education in Canada. The should be part of your speech was a little rushed, and you gave a shout out to Jack Layton. I'm sure he's grateful. But I'd like you to go back to the piece that you didn't quite finish in that convocation speech. Can you tell us, respecting that South Sudan has many challenges, that good journalistic culture there is precarious, that your own work is sincerely challenged by a regime, a government that is not really quite enough, perhaps confident enough in itself to allow people like you to do the work you need to do and to build your nation. What is the world as it should be, as you see it from your perspective as a young journalist in Juba?
The world as it should be is the world where I get to speak freely, first and foremost. The world where there is economic justice, that my village can have a clinic, can have a police station, can have basic services. Because what we are seeing in the world as it is, politicians driving around with SUVs, expensive cars, lots of corruption, is an imperfect country. I know Americans or Canadians may not be happy about the world as it is, but the world as it is, for me, there is nothing that is tolerable. That the world as it is should and must change. And there are many ways of tackling it. But for me, the most important thing is freedom of speech. And I just remember an article a friend of mine wrote, and he said, honestly, South Sudan, given the sacrifices we made, must not be a country where people are told to shut up because of fear. We have bought that freedom with our blood. And freedom of speech, if it is allowed, will allow citizens to present solutions. Because once you think that you have a monopoly on truth, then sometimes that is not the path to progress. So I think freedom of speech is the most important thing, and the world as it should be is a world where people are free to speak. And the reason why I am so interested in politics, and most of my shows are devoted to newsmakers and politicians, is because I believe that if there is a reform in the politics, it may trickle down to the poor, because the way the government is a bloated government where, you know, hundreds of former fighters are brought together, they are made deputy ministers, they are made undersecretary, former militia leaders, they are given big positions. They are taking everything. It's a government of accommodation. And if you make that a strong case, there is that freedom of speech where I can make that case for reform. Because once in a while, or more often, I would get MPs on because the budget is passed in the parliament. I mean, the basics make sense, but they don't work. Like when MPs, when they speak about equity. They say that the national cake must be shared equitably, but in the end, it passes and nothing has been touched. Our president has been talking about downsizing the government to make it lean and efficient. It has never happened, because every time he announces it, he never looks at the politics. And the politics, what it involves is people who are in positions who obviously they don't want to move, and we don't have a pension in place. So sometimes it's so difficult. When you kick that person out, what is he going to do? Where is he going to go? So you have a system where the people who should benefit from that freedom, from that independence, are not getting the services. And if there is a political reform where the voices of the people are heard and there is consultation on many of the important decisions that are made, and the government is reformed, and it's a smaller government, and the services are taken to the states where the majority of the people live, then I would have done my job.
I think we'll take questions for a few minutes. People here, some of you probably traveled in Africa or practicing journalists or just interested in communication or African politics in general.
Thanks very much for coming to speak to us, Mr. Ngor. It's inspiring. My question is, can you tell us a little bit more about the media landscape of South Sudan? Are there other journalists or organizations that share your goals, and maybe some that are working against you?
Thank you for that question. The reason why I'm working for the Catholic Radio Network, or why my show is in the Catholic Radio Network radio, is because there were not many choices. The radio stations that are available or that are vibrant, many of them are owned by the NGOs, UN agencies, and what I saw in the Catholic Radio Network, independence. And when I proposed my show, they said, well, yeah, we talk about awareness, about social issues, like civic education. So it can fall under civic education. And I have 100% control, editorial control about what I broadcast. And the other media, the other options that are available, the only TV is owned by the government. And even that is not like the programs are poor. So it doesn't have a lot of traction. And think about the fact that maybe it's only in Juba where people have TV sets. Majority, they don't have access. You talk about digital divide. In South Sudan, it's only the politicians who have the computers or NGO workers. So very little of the government work gets to the people. The TV is only effective in the diaspora. There is a government radio that is dysfunctional. Now, let me tell you, the biggest challenge facing the media industry in South Sudan is lack of training. The journalists are not trained. They don't know how to approach their work, whether they are government journalists or private journalists. They don't know. Otherwise, they would very much be like me. And now, we also don't have a printing press. So most of the newspapers are printed in the neighboring countries, Uganda, and it's very expensive. It's not profitable. And that is where radio is the most popular medium, because it's accessible to every citizen. But then the problem so far is my show is in English. Many other shows are in Arabic, but very little in the indigenous languages. So there is a disparity, there is a disconnect. Information doesn't go down to the grassroots. But I think there is a huge potential, because nothing is there. There is room for a private TV, there's room for many things. So I'm sure when there is a printing press, printing press can bring democracy to South Sudan, because anyone can start a newspaper about anything and thrive. So those are some of the challenges. The infrastructure is just not there. Internet is very slow. But for me, I think having that radio station is very important, and like there are many challenges that I face, but it's good. Like David was joking about the fact that my intro is probably the longest in the world.
It's really good.
And what I find amazing here is how, like if I get interviewed by CBC Radio, I get 7 minutes. And in my
You're used
show,
to having 2 hours, though.
yeah,
And how do you
I
restrain
have 2 hours and
every day?
and it's not just about me saying a lot, but even the way I have formatted my show, or I have designed everything, I'll give one person or two or 1 hour, the entire hour. And the reason why it is necessary, I don't buy into this idea that in 7 minutes, it doesn't get to the heart of the matter. And that's why I would have in-depth conversations, one-on-one, and we explore an issue, we in depth, and we get callers to express their view. That is good when you are building a nation. Not when you are making money, but when you are building a nation.
Other questions for Mading? Yes.
My name is Mohsen Abbas. Tell us how's the foreign media working? Do they have a double standard for foreign media, or are they being treated just like you were treated there?
Foreign media, well, we have international correspondents.
I should say that 2 foreign journalists and 1 domestic, Jack Knox, wrote letters in support of Mading's nomination, Reuters, BBC, and Jack from the TC.
Right, and so you talk about international correspondents, there's Reuters, there's Washington Post. Once in a while you will have the Globe. There was a lot of interest. During the referendum, you had sizable outlets in Canada who went for the referendum, but not for the independence. So there's actually South Sudan right now internationally is hot. And even after shutting down the oil, and oil is an international commodity, many journalists have been going. There are many documentaries that are being made about South Sudan. Here was a nation that had a lot of goodwill when it was born a year ago. And now, there are issues of corruption. So it's being followed up. I get, folks who are coming from Italy, they want to do a documentary about South Sudan, whether about media or whether it's about how this new nation is progressing. So I think their work is important because unlike me, they are not censored. And they are very important voice, just like the UN. South Sudan is under UN Chapter 7, and so there's a UN force there. and you have, you know, the embassies, obviously. And so they are partners in developing this nation because some of the values that they are espousing are good values, and they can do that without paying so much. So they lift the burden on the domestic journalists like myself. So if you were expecting to get an ungrateful South Sudanese who is unhappy about foreign media, I think they are very important. And honestly speaking, I'll tell you that what is fundamentally wrong with, you know, or the biggest misunderstanding among the international journalists about Africa in general, the biggest fault is that they always don't do justice to the issues. You know, it's like they brush the surface, and here is the story. That's the problem. But otherwise, their work is welcome. And by the way, I am an international correspondent. Mm-hmm. I work for Reuters.
A lot of us would like to be in Huffington Post. You do very well.
And Huffington Post. And what I bring in that they don't, because for me, I don't like complaining all the time. So if I say, okay, here is the biggest, you know, fault with Western journalism, the way they cover my country. If I'm not happy, then why don't I step in and I do it? And I'll tell you, I know the angle of Reuters is money, you know, finance, this and that. But the way I have approached the stories that I have sent to them is significantly different. So the best way is to encourage local journalists to work for international media.
I think too, any African journalist deals with a long and unfortunate history of Western coverage of Africa, focusing on coups and earthquakes, famines and civil war. And certainly it's been a lot of that news out of Sudan for a lot of years. But to tell the African story in a way that is realistic, that isn't misstating the facts on the ground, but also gives people enough room to feel their own hope, to feel the possibility of change there. Time for one more question, then we'll close.
What do you plan to do next?
What do I plan to do next? It's a great question because it's very challenging.
Because I take it you're going back to a situation that's a little bit hot right now, right, with the national security?
Yeah, I think I understand it.
Yeah.
I just don't know how to answer it. What do I do next? It's a dilemma because just the other night I was speaking to my mother, and she's urging me to stay in Canada. Find something to do. Don't come back. Don't go back to South Sudan. Another grandmother, don't come back. I'm so happy you are in Canada. It's a fragile country. And I say, is it because they are pessimistic about the future, or is it because they are realistic about how things are? And then the way I see it is, I have an obligation to them. I have an obligation to myself, because I don't make a lot of money from journalism. It's because I'm passionate about it, and I believe I am, you know, part of creating change, and then I have obligation to the country. And frankly, I had a frank conversation with my mother last night, and I told her, Mom, I've been telling Canadians about our life story. When we were running from the massacre in 1991, we went to the bush. Remember when my head was stung by bees and I wanted to cry, and you told me, shh. I've been telling those and they are emotional. And she's like, why are they emotional? I'm like, Mom, they didn't go through the same hardship. They don't know about it. And here is what you're telling me, to stay in Canada. And think about in another story I've been telling is about my uncle, when he left with his AK-47. That was the last time. He never came back. And what has happened years later, there is a country as a result of that. Why am I different? why should I not advance what they died for? And what's going to happen to me, or what I'm going to do next, I am still thinking, because you have to re-strategize once in a while. And I think the greatest scientist in the world up to date is Einstein, and he talks about definition of insanity. You do something over and over again in the same way, and you think you're going to have different results. So I must re-strategize. The radio is not the only way of changing the world. And I might even take Chief Eric Jolliffe's offer. Was telling me, hey, train as a police station, as a police. And I say, you know what, it's a great idea. I may even do that and then go back as a police and do investigative journalism. So there are so many options, but there's nothing conclusive yet, to be honest.
A closing comment by way of thanking you and respecting what you're doing. You know, we're a lot of us in the room are probably following the American election and secondhand getting a lot of the kind of saturation political coverage of every candidate's gaffe, tick, what they had for lunch, et cetera. A kind of over sort of super saturation of our lives with American political journalism, and sometimes it's hard to hear amid all the trivia chasing and the position taking, what journalism, especially political journalism, is supposed to be about. It's about sort of witnessing moral courage. It's about expressing political imagination. It's about reminding us that media really has consequences and really does work. To watch you not just as a journalist covering stories, but yourself part of the political process in a very direct and intimate way, in some sense brings media back to itself. Too often in North America we treat media as a utility. We turn it on, we turn it off, it's a source of information. But we forget that media, in its early days, when newspapers and radio started, notably newspapers, they operated in conditions that were distinctly unfavorable to their survival. So you really bring us back to in your example of political courage, in your example of the moral imagination you show, broadcasting this show and the other show you do, Liberation Square, remind us why media really matters. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for the work you're doing in bringing your country a future that it might otherwise have. So
thank you very much, David. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you. I'm free.
I want to thank you. Mading, do you remember, I was only lucky enough to be your teacher once. I didn't get to teach you many times, but you remember that class we had? I'm not sure if you do. It really stuck in my heart forever. Because we did something where we were exploring how to work with each other in groups, but Mading was very brave, as usual. And he shared some of his stories, but also he really went deep. Remember that? Drilled right down to why you were here, why you were in the program, and it's neat to just hear it echoed and echoed and echoed again and again. And you spoke of the kids, of yourself as a child and also the kids in your country, but in the villages, and how you felt obliged to them to, and I start thinking what a great educator you are, obviously, but consider that, okay?
What she's not going to say is that I cried.
We all did.
I hear you made a lot of people cry yesterday too, apparently, at Convocation. So, yeah.
Can I sing?
Sing? Yeah, oh, I was hoping you would.
Because telling me about the kids, and we used to sing growing up, and I'm just going to sing a hopeful song. And we used to do it this way. We are the leaders of tomorrow. Tomorrow is our day. I need to be well cared for. I need to be well educated. I need to be fully healthy. The only caveat is that we're no longer the leaders of tomorrow, the leaders of now. And that is one thing our politicians are not used to. Youth are like 70% of the population and the most educated, well educated. But they are not being seen as leaders of today. the leaders of tomorrow. There's even a famous song in South Sudan where a frustrated musician has composed this song about come tomorrow. Come tomorrow, come tomorrow. You make an appointment, you have an appointment today, and then they tell you, you come tomorrow. So come tomorrow, tomorrow has to end at some point. Thank you.
Thank you very much.